Okay, so I finished digging my hole, as you can see, and now I'm gonna put 275 gallon IBC tote in there. Okay, so I've bought a very good condition 275 gallon tote that I'm going to use as my water source for the fish. You can see that I made sure that we've got a cap here on this release valve so that I can make sure that it's sealed properly when I drop it into the ground. And then up here on the top is where I'm going to cut out my opening that will be visible above ground. Okay, these metal bars are held on with just these little bits that have a hex nut on them. So I've taken those off. I've marked the container where I'm going to cut out. And I'm just going to leave a little bit of an overhang on mine. I don't really know what my reasoning for that is, but that's what I'm planning to do. So I'm going to use a Sawzall to cut this out, and that's where we'll pick up. Okay, so I've dropped the IBC tote into the ground here. You can see I put the support beams from the top back on just to give the caging a little more structure. And my goal here was to put the to drop the IBC tote a little lower than those 2x4s you can see. I'm gonna actually frame out this little square and put a little walkway over the pond so I can get up to my stuff here a little more easily. This is all old greenhouse stuff that will be converted shortly into an aquaponic setup. You can see that I've got the rest of my greenhouse shelving back in, and that I've built a simple frame around this and put a couple boards over just so I can have easy access to plants that will eventually be up there, despite the location of the pond. So as you can see here, I've got my buckets lined out where I want them. I've taken a little marker and marked my area to cut out. I'm going to use a jigsaw to cut those circles, and then we'll drop the buckets in to make sure they all fit, and then we'll go ahead and fit them up with piping and repeat the process on the other side. Okay, so as you can see, I've got all my holes done for my buckets. From here, I'll run pipe and start getting those put together. So that'll be the next step. Okay, so the next step of this project is to get these this Dutch bucket system set up. So I ordered these grommets off Amazon. These are 3/4 inch grommets. You cut a 1-inch hole, and they'll take about a 1/2 inch PVC pipe. They've got a nice narrowed side here. Make sure your edges are clean, and you just push them through. So I'm going to do that to all 20 of my buckets, and then we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so now that we've got all our rubber gaskets in our buckets, we're going to go ahead and set up our drain pipes. Here's one that's already been done. I've drilled these holes about 2 inches from the base, slid a rubber gasket in there, and then putting this 1/2 inch PVC pipe through that hole, and putting an elbow on either side. That way when the water gets high enough to flow into that pipe, it'll come out through here and drain into this bigger 4-inch PVC pipe. This is my piece for my next bucket. You can see the ends are pretty rough. Take a razor, clean those up, and I've actually had to slide the gasket onto this piece first, and then go ahead and take the razor and just smooth out the edges there so that you can get this thing in, because they do fit pretty tight. Found that the best tool to cut this PVC pipe is just a regular old handsaw, and that gets through it in pretty much no time. So yeah, I've got my first 2 buckets done there. You can see I need to cut my holes for these to drain into still, but otherwise that's pretty much how the system's going to work. And I'll show you a bit later. I'm going to cut larger holes here and put in 3-inch net pots into this 4-inch PVC, and that's why I went with a 4-inch, just to give it a little growing room. So yeah, we will pick it up at the next stage. Okay, after a somewhat painful ordeal, we've got all our pipes inserted into the bottom of our buckets. We've got our little elbows on that side. I'm going to add elbows over here, and then we're going to something like that, and then we'll mark where we want to put our holes. I'm going to use a little 1 1/4 inch circular drill bit and make our holes so that we can drop our pipes straight into this 4-inch pipe. Okay, you can see that I've cut my holes for my drain pipes from my Dutch bucket system. It's going to come into the 4-inch PVC pipe, and the idea is that these little 3-inch mesh pots that I got off Amazon will have smaller things like lettuce and herbs, and they'll be growing from the runoff from that pipe. Just use a 3-inch circular drill bit to get my holes for that. Once they've got some weight in them, they'll sit nicely. Not too worried about that. And then I used a straight file here just to clean up the edges a bit. Very handy tool. All right. Okay, as you can hear, we've got a bit of a rainy morning here. But I've got all my little mesh pots in. I've got all my lids on my buckets. And I've got my pump down in my tank. I'm going to go ahead and run water lines. We'll pick it up from there. Okay, so I've got the pump down there, and I've got my line running up here. T-junction, one for each side. One will go over here, and the other one will run down this line. I did put shut-off valves on them. That's because I wasn't sure if I needed a pressure regulator with this pump in regards to whether or not it will blow out my drip lines. And I thought that I could just use these shut-off valves and turn them so that they don't deliver full pressure to kind of mitigate that issue. So the other thing I want to talk about real quick is, so I've got the hosing line here. I've used this little tool that you get from Home Depot or Lowe's to put these little bits in. And so it pops a hole in them. And then these things, I've kind of just used a pair of pliers like that to drive them in. And I found that to be the most useful way. I would definitely recommend getting these drip lines in place before you try and attach all the lines, because I found that this was takes a little more grunt work than you might anticipate. So it's easier to do when it's not all attached. Okay, so I've got my drip line set up now. You can see I've put little nipples, and I'll run smaller lines directly to the pots from there. For this one, I just used a little clamp to shut it off at the end. On the other side, I'm going to have a shut-off valve so I can drain water if I need to more easily out of the greenhouse. Okay, so I finished running my water line. So like I showed you earlier, T-junctions there. I've got shut-off valves on either side. Mainly if I decide to have less things growing at a time, I can turn off a side, but I can also titrate water pressure using those shut-off valves. And then I've got my little drip lines that I've cut running off those nipples. And then on this side, same kind of thing. Nipples and drip lines. And then here I've got a shut-off valve at the end. I'm going to use that just in case I need to drain the pond or drain some water of the pond, as well as I can use it to pull off water to water things that are not in line with the system. And that's it. Tomorrow I'm going to fill the tank and do a trial run and make sure everything goes the way it should, and we'll see how that goes. Okay, now doing a little test runs. I've got the water pump on. You can see that these are feeding. The water's coming out through there, down through this big tube, and running out the bottom there. I'm going to extend the pipe from this side a little further so it's running into the water, just so it's a little more calm for the fish once they get in. So I'm going to end up running this system for about 2 weeks before I add the fish, just to give bacteria colonies and everything a chance to acclimate and get set up. So yeah, we'll pick it up with some fish here in a couple weeks. Okay, as expected, learning some things the hard way as I go. These drainage systems into the pond were dripping a bit at the bottom, so I'm going to put some silicone in those just to try and give them a tighter seal. And then over here, these on-off valves are leaking slow drips. I'm just going to take them apart and put some plumbing tape on the connections, and that should solve that problem. Okay, so I've had my system up and running now for probably close to 3 weeks. I've got some aerators going. I've got my pump going, feeding all my plants. And then I grew out some seedlings. I'm going to go ahead and plant those into the buckets, kind of like this. We'll set up the dripper to be feeding them. This one needs to be positioned a little better. Yeah, haven't quite got my fish in. They're on the way. I'm going to add those as soon as they get here. I need a little bit of pH balancing, so I'm using the plants to kind of bring the acidity level down of my water. Currently I'm running at about 7.3, and ideally you want it about 6.5 to 7. So we'll see how adding a few plants adjusts the pH of the system.